Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Girivaradhari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet Nashta Prayashu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Yutamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, the killing of the demon Hiraṇyākṣa. We're almost at the end of the chapter here. And it's verse number 38. 37. Yo vai hiraṇyākṣa-vadhaṁ Yo vai hiraṇyākṣa-vadhaṁ mahādbhutam vikrīḍitam kāraṇa-sūkarātmanaḥ śṛṇoti gāyati anumodate ñjasā vimucyate brahma-vadhād api dvijāḥ yo vai hiraṇyākṣa-vadhaṁ mahā-adbhutam vikrīḍitam kāraṇa-sūkarātmanaḥ śṛṇoti gāyati anumodate ñjasā vimucyate brahma-vadhād api dvijāḥ yo vai hiraṇyākṣa-vadhaṁ mahādbhutam vikrīḍitam kāraṇa-sūkarātmanaḥ śṛṇoti gāyati anumodate ñjasā vimucyate brahma-vadhād api dvijāḥ. Vimucyate brahma-vadhād api dvijāḥ. Any non-manifested Matajis? Okay, word by word. Yaha, he who, vai, indeed, hiraṇyākṣa-vadhaṁ, of the killing of Hiraṇyākṣa, mahā-adbhutam, most wonderful, vikrīḍitam, pastime, kāraṇa, for reasons like raising the earth from the ocean, sūkara, appearing in the form of a boar. Yeah, just a small parenthesis. I'm thinking, we're trying to preach around the world, including to the Muslim community, and so what more difficult task to convince a Muslim that God appears as a boar? Anyway, ātmanaḥ, of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. śṛṇoti, hears. Gāyati, chants. Anumodate, takes pleasure. añjasā, at once, vimucyate, becomes freed, brahma-vadhāt, from the sin of killing a brahmana, api, even, dvijāḥ, O brahmanas. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. O brahmanas. Oh. Okay, let's do it this time first. O brahmanas, anyone who hears, chants, or takes pleasure in the wonderful narration of the killing of the hiraṇyākṣa demon by the Lord, who appeared as the first boar. He's the Adi Varaha. In order to deliver the world, is at once relieved of the results of sinful activities, even the killing of a brahmana. O brahmanas, anyone who hears, chants, or takes pleasure in the wonderful narration of the killing of the hiraṇyākṣa demon by the Lord, who appeared as the first boar in order to deliver the world, is at once relieved of the results of sinful activities, even the killing of a brahmana. Srila Prabhupada's purport for this verse: since the personality of Godhead is in the absolute position, there is no difference between his pastimes and his personality. Anyone who hears about the pastimes of the Lord associates with the Lord directly, and one who associates directly with the Lord is certainly freed from all sinful activities, even to the extent of the killing of a brahmana, which is considered the most sinful activity in the material world. What to speak of killing a Vaishnava? One should be very eager to hear about the activities of the Lord from the bona fide source, the pure devotee. If one simply gives oral reception to the narration and accepts the glories of the Lord, then he is qualified. The impersonalist philosophers cannot understand the activities of the Lord. They think that all his activities are maya. Therefore, they are called Mayavadis. Since everything to them is maya, these narrations are not for them. Some impersonalists are reluctant to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, although many of them are now taking an interest in it just for monetary gain. Actually, however, they have no faith. On the contrary, they describe it in their own way. We should not hear, therefore, from the Mayavadis. We have to hear from Sutta Goswami or Maitreya, who actually present the narrations as they are, and only then can we relish the pastimes of the Lord. Otherwise, the effects on the neophyte audience will be poisonous. Translation again. O brahmanas, anyone who hears, chants, or takes pleasure in the wonderful narration of the killing of the hiraṇyākṣa demon by the Lord, who appeared as the first boar in order to deliver the world, is at once relieved of the results of sinful activities, even the killing of a brahmana. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananchana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, but my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisances unto his lotus feet. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Of course, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namo Vishnu Padaya, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale, Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine, Namaste Sarasvate, Gauravani Pracharine, Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatyadeshatarine. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Panchakalpaturubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. To all the devotees present here physically, as well as to all the devotees here online who are giving their precious time to hear the Bhagavatam through a really terrible instrument such as me. So thank you, and please give me your mercy. I thought of calling this class the message of the Bhagavat. The message of the Bhagavat. A small anecdote. When I was in 1995 or so, I was doing traveling Sankirtan in North America. And we were going to college towns. And when we went to Austin, Texas, I remember I was having a difficult time approaching students, convincing them to buy Prabhupada's books or to give a donation. And I felt especially under the modes at that time. So there was a university library, a big library, so I decided, let me just go and take a break and read Prabhupada's books. And thanks to the great service of the famous Radha Damodar party and the library party in the 1970s, where Prabhupada's disciples, placed the Bhagavatam and Prabhupada's books in practically every university in America, the full set of the Bhagavatam was in this section on world religions, Hinduism. So I remember I took the 5th canto, the Forest of Material Enjoyment. It's a heavy chapter, as you know. But anyway, the point is, it's not which chapter I took. The point is, I took that book and I did something that I've almost never done, ever. I read 5 hours straight, just 5 hours, non-stop, And I'll always remember when I put the book back and I came down to the lobby and was walking back to the parking lot where the van was parked. And I remember I felt like, ever see these movies, these Marvel Comics movies where some ordinary man gets a superpower, and realizes he has superpowers? Or for example, just as a Mahabharata parenthesis, you have the story of King Vasu, who is blessed by Indra. And he's wondering, how am I going to go to the kingdom of Chedi and to the city of Suktimati and then win the hand of Queen Girika like I'm an ordinary person? And Indra says, no, you have been chosen, and he blesses him with powers. And so when King Vasu appears in Suktimati, he does he saves the princess with these amazing powers that he never knew he had. So in a similar way, I was walking, and I could have sworn I was seeing souls. I was literally just seeing souls everywhere. I wasn't, of course, I saw physical bodies, but I felt so purified, so enlivened, so empowered by contact with the Bhagavatam, contact with the pure devotee Prabhupada, that after 5 hours I was just floating, and just, my vision was, for me, for a neophyte like me, was so enlightened, so Krishna conscious. And I think we can all relate to this. We were sitting here or sitting online because we've had some experience of the wonderful effects, the edifying effects of reading Bhagavatam, of hearing Prabhupada or devotee X, Y, or Z. We may not know, for sure if someone because Krishna says, Janma karma chame divyam evam yoveti tattvatah chakva deham punarjanma naiti mametsis orjuna. One who dies thinking of Krishna and understands his transcendental nature doesn't take birth again in the material world and goes back to the spiritual world. Who are we to know? Unless we've been there, we saw souls that, Prabhupada claimed, as a small parenthesis, for example, there's, this Jayananda Prabhu. Prabhupada wrote a letter saying, Jayananda, because Jayananda Prabhu, as you know, was one of the early disciples of Prabhupada who passed away before Prabhupada. And so we have a rare case of Prabhupada certifying that, Jayananda went back to the spiritual world. But we can certainly testify that reading the Bhagavatam and hearing Krishna Katha has been always, forever, how many years we're practicing Krishna consciousness, our very foundation, our very saving grace. And so I was just wondering, so what is why? Why is it? Or is there anything mentioned in our sacred text that describe why or how contact with Krishna's teachings and Krishna's pastimes results in freedom from the cycle of birth and death, in reawakening of one's, swarup and loving service to Radha and Krishna? And so I thought in this connection, and since we're coming closer to Radhastami, and since Prabhupada in 1965, a few weeks ago, the day after Balaram Jayanti, left and is, symbolically on the Jaladuta right now, floating, having his heart attacks for this long period of austere time, and will arrive soon in America. As you all know, he wrote these wonderful prayers, the Jaladuta prayers. So, with your permission, we'll read these prayers, which are so inspiring. And in those prayers, in the middle, as you know, Prabhupada quotes 4 very important verses from the Bhagavatam, from the 2nd chapter, starting with Srimvatam Sakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana until verse 21, which describe in a capsule form this mystical, magical process of a soul's becoming free from material conditioning by hearing Krishna Katha. By hearing Krishna Katha. Now, before reading these verses, and again, in answering this question of how does this happen, one thing our Shastras claim, Sri Ishopanishad in particular, and all over, is that Krishna, contrary to the Mayavadis, and we'll get you'll hear about that a little bit later, Krishna is absolute, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport, and the words that use is Shuddham and Apapa-vidham, right? Shuddham means pure, absolutely pure. Prabhupada was a pharmacist, so it's funny, in the Sri Ishopanishad, sometimes he uses pharmaceutical terms, like, antiseptic, prophylactic. Right? He mentions this in one sentence. To confirm that the Lord is always pure and uncontaminated, Sri Ishopanishad describes him as Shuddham, or antiseptic, and Apapa-vidham, prophylactic. He is antiseptic in the sense that even an impure thing can become purified just by touching him. And then the word prophylactic refers to the power of his association. So by definition, God is infinitely pure. So anything and anyone, however impure, comes in contact with God, a purification happens. And I think Prabhupada gives us the example of the sun purifying excrements in the street, for example. By enough exposure to the sun, then even refuse becomes purified. Okay, so here's Prabhupada praying when he arrives in Boston Harbor. My dear Lord Krishna, you are so kind upon this useless soul, but I do not know why you have brought me here. Now you can do whatever you like with me. But I guess you have some business here, otherwise why would you bring me to this terrible place? So he's referring to Boston Harbor, America. If Prabhupada was here today, I think he would probably say the whole planet, including, unfortunately, even Bharat, which is not spared by Kali. Most of the population here is covered by the material modes of ignorance and passion. Absorbed in material life, they think themselves very happy and satisfied, and therefore they have no taste for the transcendental message of Vasudeva. I do not know how they will be able to understand it. I think this is the concern of a Vaishnava, even those, including, for example, those devotees who are trying to do outreach work, for example, in India. They see a very strong apathy towards becoming actual devoted to Vishnu, devoted to Krishna. There's this, piety as well, but rare are those souls who actually want to surrender their lives to Krishna. And then Prabhupada says, but I know your causeless mercy can make everything possible because you are the most expert mystic. How will they understand the mellows of devotional service? Oh Lord, I am simply praying for your mercy so that I will be able to convince them about your, again, message. And now Prabhupada is slowly coming into these 4 verses of the Bhagavatam which describe this process of purification. All living entities have become under the control of the illusory energy by your will, and therefore, if you like, by your will, they can also be released from the clutches of illusion. I wish that you may deliver them. Therefore, if you so desire their deliverance, then only will they be able to understand your message. So here we go. Now, the words of the Srimad Bhagavatam are your incarnation, and if a sober person repeatedly receives them with submissive oral reception, then he will be able to understand your message. Now, as a small parenthesis, I think this is worth mentioning, as a tiny parenthesis, but it's sort of an esoteric parenthesis, because also it refers to service to Radharani, and again, in 2-3 days we have Srimati Radharani's appearance day, and so service to the mission as connected to direct service to the residents of Vrindavan, to Srimati Radharani, is very much present and connected to this idea of giving the message to others. If you actually look at the first verse of this prayer by Prabhupada on Jaladuta, some claim that the BBT edition of this, Krishna tabe punya habe bhai, is actually mistranslated. The BBT translation is Prabhupada saying, "Oh brothers, I emphatically say unto you, you will receive your good fortune from Srimati Radharani only when Radharani becomes pleased with you." If you go on, I did it yesterday because I had heard from Agnidev Prabhu. Everybody knows Agnidev Prabhu, this famous Kirtaniya. So he had mentioned how he had spoken to Sridhar Swami, the Sridhar Swami from the Gaudiya Math, which Prabhupada wrote very nice things about. And he's a Bengali sadhu who said, no, actually, the translation is not correct. And just yesterday, to confirm, I typed this first verse, Krishna tabe punya habe bhai, e punya koribe jhabe radharani kushi habe dhruva ati boli toma thai, in ChatGPT. And I said, please give me a 100% literal translation of this. And sure enough, the translation is singular. The speaker is speaking to one person. He's speaking to who? He's speaking to Krishna. So this is just an alternative reading that Prabhupada is actually in his Swarup speaking to Krishna and saying, Krishna, listen, you will get punya. You, speaking to God, you will get punya if you can somehow make Radharani happy with you. And even more sort of interesting, I'm not saying this is a fact, so anyone who's watching, how dare Chandrasekar say this, just we're reading, the actual Bengali, and as you see, Prabhupada sometimes speaks in this very poem. He says, I hope I had a nice remembrance of you. I was wandering in the fields with you, Krishna, rolling on the ground, So we could surmise, of course this is not ultimately, Prabhupada said work now, samadhi later, but as a small parenthesis, and again referring to service to the mission as connected to pleasing Srimati Radharani. Prabhupada is telling Krishna, hey, you'll get punya if Radharani is pleased with you. And then he speaks about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And here we're not speculating, we know, because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur revealed that he in his Swarup is a manjari, a female, assistant to the gopis. And so he starts glorifying Bhaktisiddhanta and saying, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who's a servant of Radharani, gave me this impossible task of preaching in the West. And so Krishna, please help me, because if you help me, then I can please my spiritual master, who is the servant of Srimati Radharani. Radharani will be pleased, and then she'll give you punya. It's interesting. So, coming back to these Bhagavatam verses about the process of purification. As Prabhu nodded here, we're talking about 1, 2, 17 to 21. Shrimantam Sakata Krishna. Does anyone know them by heart? Punya Kirtana, Sabhadrani, Vidunudi, Suritam, and then Nashta, Abhadreshu, Nitam Bhagavati Sevaya, Bhagavati Tumashloke, Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki, and then Tada Rajas Tamo Vava, Sitam Sati Prasidati, Evam, and so Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata, Bhagavati Mukta Sangha, and then the last one, Vidyate, Hridaya Grantis, Chidyante Sarva Samshaya, Kshiyante Kshasya Karmani, Drishta Evatmanishware. So this is a little, technical, but please pay attention, not for my sake, but for your own sake, because this is like, core Bhagavatam that describes is how is it that when we hear Krishna Katha, we get purified. And it really is two things. It's Krishna reciprocating with the soul, and as we said before, the very prophylactic nature of Krishna or God, that just by contact with him, you become purified. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, what does he do? Cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. What verse from the Bhagavad Gita does this remind you of? Krishna in the heart, cleaning the heart, or that's Mahaprabhu's Shikshashtakam. But in the Gita, I was thinking, Tesham evanukam partam aham agyana jamtamaha. I, deep in Abhasvata, I dwelling in their heart destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So the same thing is being repeated here in this second chapter of the first canto. The Paramatma is in the heart, and when he sees that someone is starting to hear about Krishna, Krishna reciprocates. Okay, you're a rascal, but you're hearing about me. I'll start cleaning your consciousness. Much more so than you are doing to me, but because I love you so much, I reciprocate very much more than you actually deserve. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. As soon as loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness, and he becomes completely happy. Thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead in the stage of liberation from all material association. Thus the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. And then the last famous sentence, the chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Another parenthesis, for those of you who like, to look into Prabhupada's books and the, pre-1972 and post-1972 and the whole issue of, editing of Prabhupada's books and so on. What I find quite interesting, I think you'll find it interesting also, if you look at the 1962 version of the Bhagavatam, the Delhi Bhagavatam, and it's there, you can find it online. This last sentence, the chain of fruitive action is terminated when one sees the self as master. I'm not saying this is not what Prabhupada wrote later on. I'm not saying this, but he wrote something different in his 1962 edition. Listen to what the 1962 edition says. And I kind of prefer it because it makes more sense. Because here we've had all these verses that talk about how Rajaguna is gone, Tamaguna is gone, so Ahankara is gone, purification is taking place. And what is the symptom of a conditioned soul? Ahankara vimuratma kartahamiti manyate, right? We think we're the doers. So Prabhupada in 1962, when he's still in Delhi, he wrote this last line like this: the chain of fruitive actions are terminated along with the seeing of one's self as the dominating factor. In other words, you no longer see yourself as the doer or as the dominating factor when you become, pure. The chain of fruitive actions are terminated along with the seeing of one's self as the dominating factor. So that was we could say that was Prabhupada's entire meditation and faith. Such faith that, okay, if we can just somehow or other get them to hear the Bhagavatam, then purification will take place. And so Prabhupada continues, he will become liberated from the influence of the modes of ignorance and passion, and thus all inauspicious things accumulated in the core of the heart will disappear. How will I make them understand this message of Krishna consciousness? I am very unfortunate, unqualified, and the most fallen. Therefore, I am seeking your benediction so that I can convince them, for I am powerless to do so on my own. Somehow or other you have brought me here to speak about you. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or failure as you like. O spiritual master of all the worlds, I can simply repeat your message. So, it's Krishna who does everything. I can just somehow maybe bring the message to these people. So if you like, you can make my power of speaking suitable for their understanding. Only by your causeless mercy will my words become pure. I am sure, now this is the point, I am sure, Prabhupada's such conviction. He's all alone. He's never left India in his life. He's 70 years old. He's got no money. And he's going to America, this giant of industrial and independence and so on, with this message. No, if they can just hear the Bhagavatam. I am sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel engladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life. So he had such faith. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, we hear in his, those 64 instructions, these sutras. One of them is, the only way to associate with transcendence is through hearing. The only way to associate with transcendence is through hearing. How much important it is to hear Krishna Katha. And therefore you have these statements, for example, like Prabhupada, when, in this lecture he gave in Los Angeles about book distribution, he says, even if the book goes in one's hand, he will be benefited, If he reads one line, one word, this is such a nice thing. I know it by heart because when we were doing book distribution at the Los Angeles airport, we had this recording of a song by Niranjara Prabhu where he, that little passage for Prabhupada, so we just hear it again and again. This is such a nice thing. Therefore we stress, please distribute book, distribute book, distribute book, distribute book. And Prabhupada finishes the last two stanzas, O Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hand, so if you have brought me here to dance, then what? Make me dance, O Lord, make me dance as you like. I have no devotion, nor have any knowledge, but I have strong faith in, what does Prabhupada says when he signs his, I have no devotion, I have no knowledge, but he admits, I have strong faith in the holy name, exactly, in the holy name of Krishna. I have been designated as Bhaktivedanta, and now if you like, you can fulfill the real purport of Bhaktivedanta. Signed, the most unfortunate, insignificant beggar, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, on board the ship Jaladuta, Commonwealth Pier, Boston, Massachusetts, 18 September 1965. And when we used to hear this, we were so inspired. And, when you're 20 years old and you have this sense of revolution, and there's this verse from the Bhagavatam, Tadvag visargo janataga viplavo yasmin pratishloka badhavatyapi namanya natasya yashoni kanadiyat grinanti, what is it? Śṛṇoti, gāyaty, grinanti sadhava. That this here, on the other hand, as opposed to literature for crows, this is a different creation altogether. It's a whole different category of literature. It's full of descriptions of the transcendental glories of the name, fame, form, pastimes of the unlimited Supreme Lord. It's a different creation directed towards bringing about a revolution in the lives of this world's misdirected civilization. Do you know the podcast Wisdom of the Sages? Anyone raise your hand here who is familiar with the podcast Wisdom of the Sages? So in America, at least, actually in the whole Western world, there's a very popular podcast called Wisdom of the Sages, which was voted #1 actually on iTunes a few years ago in the category of spirituality worldwide. And it's run by Raghunath Prabhu and Kaustubha Prabhu. And Raghunath Prabhu is, I would say, one of the greatest contemporary Vaishnava poets. And so before he does this podcast, back in the 1990s, he was part of a rock band called Shelter. Anyone heard of the rock band Shelter? It was a punk rock band, all devotees, and they toured across America, and they did this really heavy sounding rock music, kind of like you see today in India with the Madhavas rock band, for example, but in punk rock style, like taking Yukta Vairagya to the utmost limit, with very heavy lectures. And I remember we would go we'd be traveling in these vans and going to these big concerts with thousands of cars of young people coming in, to watch this concert of this mundane music, and we'd be listening to to these songs. And there was one song in particular by this band, Shelter, which Raghunath Prabhu was the lyricist and the singer, called The Message of the Bhagavad. And I remember we would sing so loud, as we were getting with our bags of books ready to go and distribute, and with our caps hiding our bald head, and so we don't get caught by the police, And so there's this one song. I just want to read to you these a few stanzas from this poem, which for me was just still so inspiring. Message of the Bhagavad. And I'll play for you just the introduction. And for those of you who went to the Gurukul here back in the day, and still you'll recognize the beginning mantras chanted by the children, but then you'll see what kind of music kicks in. Just listen to a few seconds of this, so you get the mood. Maybe you're in that recording. You are? Wow. Ananda is there. So remember we were driving and listening to this song, and the lyrics is, out of respect for Raghunath, because I really admire him, all the service he does. Listen to this. Concealed, revealed, a revolution, a solution, without bloodshed, finally, disciplic succession, placed in my possession. Complete, so sweet, a satisfying taste for an empty race. There's a fire in the city, a fool won't admit it, and only a fool will sit right in it. History of the universe, 18,000 verses for our edification. I sat like an ass in class for 14 years. Finally, I got some real education. We can all identify with that, isn't it? Those of us who were not born in the Krishna consciousness movement, we're exposed, unless we're a Christian or, we're at least getting some sort of bhakti in the form of the Bible and so on. But for most of us, at least speaking for myself, even though I come from a Catholic background, it was just kind of, total ignorance. And finally, and so the singer here also coming from the same background, I sat like an ass in class for 14 years. Finally, I got some real education, extinguishing the fire of our workaday life that burns and burns us until we break. It's illuminating, rejuvenating, not degenerating, giving shelter to the people who want truth. And then the chorus is, we have the message of the Bhagavad, the message of the Bhagavad. So I'll just play again, just 10 seconds, so that the Brahmins in this room will not, become too frazzled. But this is the chorus. We have the message of the Bhagavad. And this is historic. I mean, I bet you historians in 200, 300 years will note this type of efforts, of this fulfillment of Mahaprabhu's prediction, based again on this faith of hearing Bhagavatam. But this is the chorus. We have the message of the Bhagavad. Anyway, you get the point. We have the message of the Bhagavad. So I just wanted to share with you, because this for me is a great memory, and it illustrates how the followers of Prabhupada have imbibed this same faith. Not to say that I have the faith, but Prabhupada's followers, first, second generation, have imbibed this mood of faith in the transcendental effect of Krishna Katha. And therefore, we try, and devotees of Krishna try their best to somehow, stay strong in their Krishna consciousness by regularly hearing. So, for example, those of you online who are doing this, those of you who are sitting here and, hearing at home and reading at home, and I know devotees who have, MP3 players who are waterproof. So then when they're taking bath and when they're shaving or putting tilak or putting their clothes, they're, listening to the Bhagavatam or listening to a lecture of Prabhupada or whoever is their, their most inspiring devotee. Now, unfortunately, in just a few words on the Mayavadis, they don't get this nectar. Why? As Prabhupada says in the purport, because the Mayavadis don't believe in the transcendental nature of Krishna. They think Krishna is just mundane. Brahman is reality, and when Brahman manifests in this world, how is the big question, of course, but when Brahman manifests, because if everything is illusion, then how Anyway, there's a lot of philosophical problems with Mayavad philosophy, but when Brahman manifests in the world, it manifests as Krishna. So Krishna at best is, Brahman in the mode of goodness, or Brahman influenced by sattva guna. And therefore all of Krishna's pastimes, including the Rasa Lila and so on, is just material, it's mundane. But it helps us, while we're conditioned until we gain the stage of mukti and become one. So that's why I guess Prabhupada says in the purports, for the Mayavadis, we can also call them mityacharis. Mityacharis, those who really believe that this whole world is actually an illusion. We don't say it's an illusion. Vaishnavas say that this world is an energy, a real energy, manifest, unmanifest, granted, but it's a real energy of a real God, of a real Supreme Person. It's not an illusion. Somehow the Vaishnavas have faith in this statement, Janma karma chame divyam evam yoveti tatvada. Divyam, Krishna and everything related to Krishna, even Krishna's devotees. And in verse 34 of this very chapter, a few verses before, the narrator says, what to speak of hearing the pastimes of the Lord, people may take transcendental pleasure even in hearing of the works and deeds of the devotees, whose fame is immortal. So even hearing of Vaishnavas is as purifying and as liberating as hearing Krishna's pastimes. And therefore we love hearing, the pastimes of Prabhupada, for example, or the previous acharyas, or Sankirtan stories, or, success in devotional service. And Prabhupada does say in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the activities of the Krishna consciousness movement today are an extension of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. Of course, not when devotees act sinfully. That's not Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. But when at least they're trying their best and not doing some crazy stuff, we could say that's part of Mahaprabhu's transcendental Leela. So as Sachinandan Swami would say, my dear devotees, you should continue hearing. Just continue what you're doing, Prabhus. Continue having this faith that you have, that Krishna is God, that Krishna's pastimes are transcendental, that Krishna's teachings are transcendental, and that if you continue just hearing regularly Krishna Katha, then you're perfectly situated. Spiritually speaking, there's no greater perfection in your life than continuing to hear and chant about Krishna. Right? And you should continue also, serving the mission. And we saw there's a connection, between serving the mission and pleasing Radha and Krishna. My initiating spiritual master, Bhakti Sharad Swami, he would often quote this verse from Prabodhananda Saraswati, Yata yata gaura padara vinde, binde to bhakti krita punjarashi. I forget the last two lines. What's the last two lines, Prabhu? Yata yata gaura padara vinde, binde to bhakti krita punjarashi, and then Hridi akoshmat radha shudam borashi, something like that. The point is, Prabodhananda Saraswati Thakur says that to the degree that you serve Mahaprabhu's mission, to that degree you will see that all of a sudden, akoshmat apparently means all of a sudden, you will realize, you will see, wow, that your heart has become inundated with the nectar that is emanating from the toenails of Srimati Radharani. So what more do you want? So you dedicate yourself, perhaps we could say that's why Prabhupada said, work now, samadhi later. You serve the mission. You serve the mission of Sankirtan, of contributing to the Sankirtan Yagya, and by doing that, you get Srimati Radharani's mercy. You get Srimati Radharani's mercy. As Prabhupada quoted Bhaktisiddhanta, try to preach. This is, Prabhupada tells, this is what Bhaktisiddhanta told him in a letter. Try to preach whatever you have learned from me in English. Try to preach whatever you have learned from me to the people in English. That will be good for you and to the people to whom you preach. That is my instruction. Any correction? Any comments? Questions?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. It was a nice lecture and I think very inspiring, and I am just going through the purport, and it is written here, we should hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from pure devotees. And there is another word, Maitreya. So what is Maitreya?
I think he's referring to Maitreya Rishi.
Maitreya Rishi.
Yes.
Okay.
These dialogues, is Maitreya Rishi. I forget exactly who is speaking to who, but Vidura and Maitreya.
Okay. And it is written, we should hear Srimad Bhagavatam from pure devotee.
Yes, we should hear the Bhagavatam from pure devotees.
So if we are reading Bhagavatam in our home, that is not recommended?
Of course it's recommended.
Okay.
Of course. I mean, reading Bhagavatam, even reading the Bhagavatam without the purports is recommended. And the Bhagavatam is the Amala Puran. It's spotless. When you read the commentaries, when you're reading Prabhupada's purports, you're hearing from, we consider Prabhupada a great, Mahabhagavad, the Senapati Bhakta of Lord Chaitanya. So you're certainly hearing from a pure devotee when you're reading his purports.
Okay. Now next question is, what is the difference between devotee and pure devotee? And who is pure devotee?
Well, who is pure devotee? When you look at Prabhupada's statements on the topic, it ranges. For example, the Tamal Krishna Maharaj, this is I think it's in Lilamrita or it's in those Prabhupada memories. He asked Prabhupada, how many, this is 1967 or 1968, a few hundred devotees in ISKCON, and they asked Prabhupada, how many pure devotees are there? And Prabhupada said, how many devotees we have in ISKCON? And the devotee said, whatever, 325. Okay, there's 325 pure devotees. So that's one definition. Another definition is, Rupa Goswami gives in the Nectar of Instruction, one who's, like the gopis, who is completely dependent on Krishna, who has absolutely no material desires. It's all about serving the divine couple, and who's constantly thinking of Krishna, never forgetting him even for a moment. That's certainly a definition of a pure devotee as well. We should be generous. And I think if we stay within the Sangha, the Shiksha Sangha of ISKCON, then we're pretty safe. Anyone else? Because I respect your time. We have 5 more minutes. Prabhu. Devotee Association. But I think Prabhu behind you has a question.
Thank you. Thank you for your nice class.
Your mercy, Prabhu.
So in the purport, Prabhupada did not mention, in excuse, you can kill the brahmanas. He did not mention. In the excuse of this translation, the killing of brahmanas, by hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam, killing of brahmana will be eradicated. So it's like nam bale papa bharad. So we can chant Harinam and I can do the sinful activities.
Right.
So it is look like this, that we can hearing Bhagavatam and at the same time we can kill the brahmanas.
Well, fortunately, there's not too many people in this world who have like this uncontrollable urge to kill Brahmins. So I guess the problem doesn't show up too much. Although in India, there's some pretty strong, anti-Brahmin, unnecessary Brahmin agitation. I think you may be referring to, acting sinfully on the strength of the holy name. So the same applies also to, I'll break the 4 regulative principles because I know that I'll chant the next day and I'll be okay, Like the elephant who goes to take bath and then puts sand again on himself. So I think we have to be sincere. And I'm definitely preaching to myself here. We have to be sincere. There's statements like this all over our shastras that just by chanting Hare Krishna, and we see, for those of us who are not have never been, who have not always been absolutely 100% perfect in following their vows, for example, they experience that when there's an accidental fall down, when they take shelter of Krishna again, they feel purified. So they have experience of these statements that Krishna really is kind and purifying, but then taking advantage of that, that's not cool. Excuse my language. It's not nice. And Prabhupada mentions in the Apichet Suduracharo verse, right, that if someone repeatedly is falling down, when he should be understood to be not a high devotee. That's his exact words. So I'm certainly in that category. Forgive me. Anyone else? So just, I think we have to go a bit. No? I just wanted to. Well, do you tolerate? Is it okay with the August Assembly here for one more question? You wanted to say something, Prabhu? It's a comment. Please. Take the purport.
Tulayamalavenapi na swargam na punarbhavam bhagavad sanghasya matyanam kimuntashisha. by getting association of devotees, it is higher than attaining heavenly planets. It is mentioned in the Bhagavatam.
That's how you mentioned association, how important association is. Well, speaking of, this is a perfect way to end. I thought we could all recite this verse together. This is from the Prachetas. So if you'll kindly repeat after me, the subject is we, so it's all we together praying. So in the Prachetas said, please repeat after me. Dear Lord, as long as we have to remain within this material world, due to our material contamination, and wander from one type of body to another, and from one planet to another, we pray that we may associate with those who are engaged in discussing your pastimes. We pray for this benediction, life after life, in different bodily forms and on different planets. Thank you. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.